Okay, we might have a wee bit of a walk. I guess you need the money shot. We're standing underneath it going, yeah, it's up there.
Pine martens are evasive. They evolved to escape foxes and birds of prey, and now it seems pine marten researchers. Craig Shuttleworth released 4 in North Wales with radio wave detectable collars, and we're trying to find the only trackable one left.
Once they've been settled and they start to make their territory, form it and mark it with scat and stuff, they begin to do what wild martens have done.
The animal we're looking for was born here at the New Forest Wildlife Park in Southampton. Pine martens have declined in the past century and are the subject of reintroduction programmes across the UK.
So the pine marten reintroduction is part of a large partnership programme. So we work with Forestry England, Woodland Trust, Vincent Wildlife Trust and Forest Research to reintroduce a large group of pine martens, or restore the pine marten population in Gloucestershire, which will in turn kind of expand into the neighbouring counties, finally join up with the expanding and recovering Welsh population to help restore a kind of pine marten population in England which has been missing for almost 100 years.
Translocation is about community. It's about talking to landowners and people who live in the area where you're going to put the animal. But it's also having an idea about what that animal, its significance to people who don't live there, because they may end up with it. So if you release, they breed and spread. Conservationists want them to spread across the landscape. And that's always tricky. But how do you gauge public opinion, especially on species for which a lot of people don't really have a baseline knowledge, So it's very easy to give leading information. When we did our screening document, one of the comments that we got from government scientists was, are you sure you actually really want to do it? Because your screening document has quite a lot of negative in it, more than they expected. We were very honest, because our negative was more uncertainty. What would these captive martens do? We were uncertain, so we had to be honest about that.
Conor Macmillan is a self-confessed pine marten addict. There are no helplines for this, only jobs at wildlife parks.
We've got Hamish, our male, and he's roughly about 8 or 9 years old. He was brought in as part of a group of kits that were orphaned by the mum, and they were hand raised. And then from that, he has then started breeding, I think when he was about 3 or 4 years old. And since then, they've had 2 or 3 litters. Each litter has had 3 youngsters, and that's with Rolo, the female. And she, again, is about 8 or 9 years old, but she was captive born at a same native collection in Wildwood over in Kent. And I think since they've been here, these guys have obviously bred together, had the youngsters, and since the 2019 youngsters, they went back out into the wild.
He's not surprised we're having trouble finding the Snowdonia pine marten based on the behaviour of its mother, who lives here.
With mum's behaviour and mum's attitude, she's not as brazen, she's not as confident as Hamish is, because he's had a lot more sort of human contact in growing up. Because she's been distance away, she naturally has that sort of wilder pine marten behaviour. They love deep woodland, and they can disappear 20 metres into it. They can disappear from anywhere in that area, and if they're just disappearing and going and cracking on, we've got no idea. And then if they're coming out at night, we've really got no idea. They could be all over the UK, they could be all over England. We just aren't looking in the right places, or they're just quietly going about their business.
Pine marten reintroduction is unpopular with lovers of all kinds of wildlife, especially red squirrels. But Craig, who led the reintroduction of red squirrels to Anglesey, with air gunners and trappers like him cleaning out the invasive greys, says pine martens are no threat.
If they got into your hen house and decided they were going to work their little magic, they might cause, you're going to lose some hens. But if you left your the pop door open and a fox got in, that would do the same. So it's good husbandry.
When a fox goes in a chicken coop, he ain't got a clue when his next meal's going to be, but all of a sudden he's got 8 running around. What's he going to do? He's going to kill all of them and then be like, right. Anyway, the next day he'll wake up and probably forget he's killed 6 chickens the day before. And these guys, again, they get picked on because they'll go in and they'll do that.
Undoubtedly, whatever they are, if you create a food source, predators will respond. There is a potential that if it's not sensibly balanced, that it can have a negative impact on a whole host of species in a habitat. So you have to almost, when you're introducing species for sporting purposes, you have to be sensible about the level of impact you're having.
And as background to the project, we actually spent some time in Northern Ireland, went to a couple of shooting estates who had quite large numbers of pheasants being released. And I was struck by the fact they had no electric fences on the pens, and even though they had martens present. So I said, well, that's weird. Don't the martens cause you loads of trouble? No. The martens maybe take the occasional pheasant, but it's within that sort of 10% loss that you'd expect anyway for other stuff to take. So they weren't adding anything else, and they felt they weren't doing anything at all. They were pushing the grey squirrels down, which was good if you want timber crops.
European pine martens have a different smell to American pine martens. North American grey squirrels don't have the pine marten smell on their radar. If they smell a North American pine marten, they're out the area. If they smell a European pine marten, they're like, oh, what's that? And by that whack, they're dead because the pine marten snuck up on them, but they don't have that immediate, that's a threat, I need to run. Which again is why these guys are so important.
Pine martens have an advantage over other small furry animals, which makes them a potential threat if their population spirals out of control.
You can't hunt an apple if it's fallen from the tree. You haven't got to hunt berries. You can go and eat it and they're getting more energy from it. But because it only happens in one season or at the end of one season and at the start of the other, they're not going to do it all year round, which means when times are hard in the winter, they will probably then adapt for the easier prey, the more abundant prey, which is probably going to be game birds in that scenario.
As climate has changed, one of the big changes on the west coast here has been the decline in the rabbit population. I think as that's occurred, what we have noticed is that the omnivores are outperforming the carnivores. And probably the most classic one here, if you'd gone out with me here with a spotlight 25 years ago, probably one of the first things we would have seen is wildcat. And one of the things we wouldn't have seen a lot of was pine martens. And what has happened is as the rabbit population has declined, there's no doubt in my mind that the pine marten has outperformed the cat in a number of environments. And we're seeing pine martens now well away from the woodland edge. We see them out on Ben Heant, which is 500 metres above sea level, no woodland cover at all. What is interesting is that they've become much more nocturnal about it, and that's because we've seen them falling as prey to other predators. And the sea eagle isn't adverse to the odd pine marten given the opportunity. But predators by nature will predate on other predators.
At Abernethy in Scotland, pine martens and the RSPB's refusal to get a licence to trap them are reasons the charity is failing to re-establish capercaillies, despite millions of pounds of public and lottery money. Back on the Welsh moors, our pine marten chase doesn't appear futile after all.
He's in here, and luckily I think there's a road inside that wood. You're smiling.
So we could have driven there.
We could have driven there. From a sort of scientific point of view, that's another dot on the map, because I've never found him over there before. This is new. And he's a captive male. He was 3 years old when we got him, never been out in the wild at all. Very much a home bird when we first released him, hanging around the enclosure, going in the enclosure at night, sleeping there. Slowly weaned himself off of that, started to use drays and pigeon nests up in the trees in the conifer, and now here he is, he's roaming across North Wales. And this is really interesting because he's captive. He never killed anything in his life, never been out. His enclosure would probably be, you'd measure it in meters, square meters. I mean, here he is, he's covering, kilometres now, roaming around on his own, doing his thing. It's quite intriguing, and it shows you the sort of what they call behavioural plasticity, his ability, his adaptability. He's able to do this despite the fact that all those years he never was able to experience it. All he's got to do is breed with the female this year. That's his job. That's his one job, is to breed with her